What's up, students? Welcome to the live stream. It's time for some more history. I'm excited. I hope you're excited. We've got a bit of a banger, as you say, this week. We're going to be talking about the 1920s, a decade that I think is often misunderstood for a couple of different reasons. And we're gonna talk a little bit about my journey through understanding the 1920s, because it wasn't until very, very recently that I really understood how important this decade was. So we'll talk about that. So before we get into that, go ahead, say hi in the chat. Let me know that you're here. I always appreciate knowing who's in the chat or who's on the stream. So, you know, if I want to use your name in an example, that helps me out a little bit. Plus, it's just good to see who's interacting with the stream. So good morning, Victoria. I'm super glad that you're here. We may have a special guest in the chat, which is kind of exciting and terrifying at the same time. And so I was talking to my mom this weekend, and I was telling her about the stream that I do, and she's like, "Oh, I'm free at 11 on Tuesday." So I gave my mom the link to the stream, so my mom may be joining us today, which is super cool. I don't think my mom has ever watched me do any kind of history teaching before, you know, besides like family dinners back in the day, you know, when I was still in Colorado, still at home, or visiting from college. So Mom, if you're out there, I hope you enjoy this, and I hope I don't embarrass you, because yeah, you know, it's also gonna mean that I gotta watch my language a little bit. Actually, that's not true at all. But you know, it's a good thing just in case that I have at the ready, in case I'm about to say something I might regret. Anyway, so good morning, Mariana. Good morning, Soraya. Good morning, Sheena. Super glad that you're here. And let's go ahead and dive in. And let's start with a bit of a personal story. So back in high school in Colorado, when I was a sophomore, we had this American Studies class. And oh, my mom just texted me and is like, "I'm trying to join you." This is funny. Hold on a second. Let me text her back. All right. So I'm a sophomore in high school in Colorado at this school you've probably heard of called Columbine. Yes, that one. And in this American Studies class, oh, my mom's here. She says she's here. This is hilarious. All right. My mom is actually in the chat. Fantastic. So, American Studies class, it's a combination of American history and American lit. And our final project for the year is we are tasked as a group with making a museum exhibit that captures one of the decades. And the goal was to, you know, we had this night when everybody, like our parents, our families came in, and they were able to walk through our exhibit, and that we were supposed to be kind of like the docents, you know, like the tour guides for our particular exhibit, that sort of thing. Well, in any case, my group got assigned the 1920s, and we were super ecstatic about this because, you know, like, here we are 15 years old, and the things that you focus on when you're 15 years old are things like, oh, people went to the bar and people did these dances and there was gambling and there was all this other stuff, right? And like, we literally built a speakeasy out of PVC pipe and curtains and sheets and some other things. And we put on some swing music and we taught people how to dance the Charleston and all that stuff. So, you know, like, I remember a lot of that night. And when I thought about the 1920s for a long time, like, that was my lasting image of what the 1920s was like. And as a result, I never really took the decade too seriously, because it was like, okay, well, we're here in the 1920s. We just got done with World War I. That was kind of exciting. Then here's the 1920s, and then we're to the Great Depression. Not my mid-20s, but, you know, the actual Great Depression. I always make that joke. I have to stop it at some point. But anyway, you get to it's this kind of like waiting period between World War I and World War II, because everybody gets excited about the World Wars. Which, you know, reading some of your week 6 discussion posts about what you're excited about for the rest of the class, you know, World War II came up a lot, so that hasn't gone anywhere. In any case, what we need to do is we kind of need to walk back that, you know, and I'm speaking kind of personally here, where we need to walk back that kind of romanticized idea about the 1920s. There's lots to romanticize. And, you know, when we talk about romanticizing a particular decade or era in history, there's always some kind of like kernel of truth to why we romanticize that particular period or decade or person or whatever. There's something that we want to pull in. And indeed, there is lots of things like music and dancing and gambling and speakeasies and all of that stuff in the 1920s. And if your first image of the 1920s is F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, the novel, maybe, you know what, fine, the movie, the recent one. Wasn't Leo DiCaprio in that film? I can't remember. I should know. I didn't like The Great Gatsby in high school, so I've kind of like avoided it. It's one of those books that I need to go back to and read again and see if it's as good as people say it is, because, man, I just remember hating it. But the only thing that I liked in high school, like literature-wise, was The Catcher in the Rye, which I'm kind of embarrassed about now. Because Holden Caulfield is a really person, and yeah. In any case, so we need to kind of pull that wool up from our eyes and kind of get to the meat of what the 1920s are about. And I want to suggest to you that there are a number of things that we need to look at. Number one, we need to look at the politics of the 1920s. In particular, we need to look at the presidential politics of the 1920s, because they tell us a lot about the reaction to a lot of the turmoil that we saw in the previous couple of decades, particularly the progressive movement and especially World War I. The kind of presidential politics, the national politics we're going to see, especially in presidential elections, tie into that reaction. So it's kind of interesting, right? We've been talking about over this course how each era has been a reaction to the one previous to it, right? So we took a look at Reconstruction, and then we saw the reaction to that in the Gilded Age. We took the Gilded Age and we said, okay, progressivism is a response to the Gilded Age, and now I'm saying that this new business culture of the 1920s in American politics is a direct response to the progressive era. So it's like history builds on itself, you know, and everything kind of relates to each other. So we need to look at that. We also need to look at culture. And there are two aspects of culture that I want to look at for our talk today. And one of the aspects of culture that we need to look at is we need to look at this kind of overarching pushback to not just the progressive movement, but to the way in which people are dealing with a new definition of what it means to be modern. And we should talk a little bit about what modernity, that is, what it means to be modern, actually means. And spoiler alert before we get there, it always changes. I'll blow your mind a little bit with that in just a bit. So we need to talk about this kind of slippage between the advances of the modern world and this desire to hold on to the traditions of the past. And that has real implications for how we handle such things in our modern world, like as in 2021. See how that definition of modern keeps changing? Hold on a second. So we need to look at that, and we need to look at subculture. And subculture, we think of subculture as like, oh, those punk kids, those goth kids, gamers, whatever. Again, that's more recent, but there are subcultures that are worth examining in the 1920s that we need to understand. And we should honestly ask the question, are these actually subcultures, or are these mainstream cultures within the broader United States? And here I'm talking about, number one, fundamentalist Christianity, which comes up for the very real first time in the 1920s. It is a very specific American form of Christianity, and it's important that we understand it. So we need to look at fundamentalist Christianity. We need to look at flappers. We need to look at not just flappers, but kind of the whole new woman, as they called it in the 1920s, subculture. We need to take a look at that. We need to take a look at what's going on for African Americans. And we have to approach a difficult subject. We need to talk about the Klan. And that, when I say Klan, I mean Klan with a K, the KKK. They come back, and they have an immense presence in the 1920s. And one of the things that the American Yop, our textbook, points out, and it's not just the Yop, it's pretty much every textbook that I've ever looked at, and every analysis of the 1920s that I've looked at since kind of changing my mind about it. The Klan isn't a secret organization in the 1920s. It's out in the open. Whereas now, politicians would hide any association that they might have had in the past or in the present with the Klan, with very few exceptions. David Duke, who's still around somehow, was a grand wizard in the Klan, in the third Klan or fourth Klan. Anyway, he doesn't hide it, but I'm gonna pick on him because he's one of our senators. But if Ted Cruz announced that he was a member of the Klan, he's not a member of the Klan. Probably that would go very poorly for him. But here in the 1920s, we had in Texas a member of the United States Senate who ran as a Klandidate. Okay? Marrying Klan and candidate together, right? So, I mean, that tells you just how mainstream the Klan was. And there's some kind of suggested reading that I want to put in your orbit if you're curious about this question. So that's kind of our plan of attack. Sorry, it took me 15 minutes to kind of lay it all out, but let's do this as efficiently, let's say, as we possibly can. As we go through these different things, if you have questions, throw them in the chat. Let me know what, if there's something that I need to clarify or something that you wanted to hear just a little bit more about that I didn't cover. and we'll see what we can do to really dig at that question and see if we can come up with an answer. One thing that I did want to point out before we get going here is if we look at Google Chrome here for a second. Hold on just a minute. We're going to do a little inception work here. If we look at the American Yop, you're going to notice that a lot of the primary sources that I pulled from this week and for most weeks actually come from this primary source section of the American Yop. There's a lot that I don't assign. So if, when we get to essay 2 and you're like, well, I wanted to write about this aspect, but we didn't have a primary source for it. This is something that you can come back to and take a look at. So like if you are interested in writing about the Klan or using the Klan as a piece of evidence, you can go here and you can take a look at this photo, and we can take a look at it a little bit later as well. So as questions come up, please do not hesitate to ask me questions. That way we can get them answered. All right, so let's rewind a little bit. World War II is over. All right, World War I is over, excuse me. And America's got a choice to make. We have been presented the Treaty of Versailles. And the Treaty of Versailles is controversial in the United States. The Treaty of Versailles, the peace treaty that ends World War I, is controversial in a lot of ways. And we're going to see when we get to World War II in a couple weeks that the Treaty of Versailles is in many ways mostly responsible for World War II. It animates especially Germany. And we'll talk about how Hitler, uses the Treaty of Versailles as a way of creating his ethno-state. It's all there, believe me. In any case, in the United States, the Treaty of Versailles comes back, and Woodrow Wilson is all about it, man. Like, this is his 14 points kind of writ large, especially this bit about the League of Nations. And the United States takes one look at the Treaty of Versailles and goes, hell no. We're not joining this. We're not ratifying this. No way. I mean, there's a debate about it, right? But the majority of the Congress, the Senate in particular, comes back and says, absolutely not. We're not signing on to this. We're not going to ratify the Treaty of Versailles. We're not going to join the League of Nations. None of that. We want nothing to do with it. And so what the United States has decided is that it is going to retreat back into isolationism, where it started before World War I. And we talked about this. If we didn't talk about it in the stream in a lot of detail, you read about it in the Yop. We decided way before World War I that we were going to try to just be on our own, not get involved in foreign politics, etc., even though we did all the time. I mean, come on, give me a break. But we, as a nation, decide, okay, we're staying out of World War I until we're drawn in at the last minute. And now that we're done with World War I, we're retreating back into isolationism. And that's going to have consequences. Meanwhile, the United States is feeling pretty good about its place in the world. It has a seat at the table now that it has helped its principal allies, number one, Britain, number two, France, or, maybe France is number one, Britain's number two. They've always been our allies, even though we've fought against them a couple times. But, that's the way it is. Britain and France are our homies. Full stop. So we are thinking, okay, we're in good with them. The Ottoman Empire is dead. The Russians are commies now, because they are. I mean, Vladimir Lenin's running the show over there, and we're really scared about it. And we're especially scared about communists coming over here. And we're going to get really scared about that after World War II. But it happens in 1919. There's a first Red Scare. It's terrifying for a lot of people. That's part of what's animating this culture war that we're going to talk about. So Russia's doing its thing. Italy, nobody cares about Italy right now. Like, Italy's just there. I mean, it's doing Italy things, but it's not a big problem. Germany's been put in its place. The Austria-Hungarian Empire has been split up. The Middle East and Africa are really under the thumb of our allies, Britain and France and some other European countries. So we're feeling pretty good. You know, we want to keep our trade with Britain and France. We want to, but we don't want to go crazy. And we've also shown, based on how we were able to mobilize production for World War I, just what we're capable of doing here at home. We have new resources that we have an abundance of, particularly electricity and gasoline. And that's going to mean some real interesting developments. So, how does this play into presidential politics? Our first real kind of umbrella topic. Well, coming out of World War I, and look at the presidents that we've had from World War I looking back a little bit. So we had guys like Taft, we had guys like Wilson, we had guys like Teddy Roosevelt, these really progressive guys. And what are, especially under Woodrow Wilson, especially during World War I, the story is progressivism. Okay, using the tools of the federal government to regulate and push things forward, especially in terms of business. A retreat away from the Gilded Age, where everything was kind of free and open capitalism. You know, guys like Carnegie and Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan Chase and, the guys who still have their names on 50-story buildings. And during the Progressive Era and during World War I especially, the government really kind of put the screws to all of that free market laissez-faire capitalism for good reason. We saw some of this with, like the Food and Drug Administration, the Meat Protection Act, those sorts of things. We had some things to rein in. And during World War I, we needed that production. Well, now the war's over. And what American business says it needs is it needs these restrictions lifted off of them. And we want to shutter all of that away. So it turns to a different kind of politician. Progressivism isn't going to be the order of the day anymore. We're not going to have a presidential election where all the candidates are essentially progressives at this point. Okay, even the Republican, back when it was Wilson and Roosevelt and Taft, all in the same election, they were all pretty progressive guys. But now we have Warren G. Harding. Warren G. Harding has a reputation. Warren G. Harding is known as one of the most corrupt presidents in American history, and for good reason. It's not really him, I guess. It's more of the people that he appoints who get into trouble, especially with the Teapot Dome scandal, where essentially the government was just giving land away to oil companies. Not good. Really not good. But Warren G. Harding, besides that, promises a return to normalcy in his campaign. And that's one of the documents that you read this week, or you're supposed to read this week, since I know it's only Tuesday. But he says, look, the progressive era was not normal, man. Like that was weird and World War I was out of control and weird. We need to leave that behind, and we need to go back to the free market politics of the Gilded Age. We need to return to that normal. And that's what he promises. And for the most part, that's really what delivers him the election. You know, Americans are like, I can't believe we got involved in this war. What a terrible experience that was. Because World War I was a nightmare. Let's be very clear about that. Very clear that it was a nightmare. We talked a little bit about that last week. So Americans are tired of that, even though we were only in the war for like 4 or 5 months. Whatever. We're tired of it. We don't want anything to do with that anymore. So we want to get back to business as usual. Except business is not going to be usual. Not at all. I mean, that's kind of what the Yop talks about, right? Where it's like, you know, it's this promise of a return to normalcy, but the 1920s are anything but normal. They're not normal at all. And that's kind of what makes them interesting. Well, in any case, Harding starts lifting restrictions. We kind of return to this free market capitalism, like unrestrained. And it seems to be working. Because the American economy does really freaking well in the 1920s. And we all know that when it comes to national politics, Americans value the economy more than they value just about anything else. People will vote for a stronger economy, or what they perceive to be a stronger economy, than they will just about any other thing. So, Harding has set a good standard. And the production increases. We're seeing more electricity. We're seeing more gasoline. Importantly, this is huge. We see the expansion, and more, actually, it's more than just the expansion. Really, the first time that banks offer consumer credit. So now, the average American, your middle class person, has a purchasing power that they didn't have before. Because credit allows you to own things that you can't afford. If you had to pay cash for a car, how long would it take you to save up for it? I mean, some of us are pretty well set, but, you know, like, when you go and buy a car, I bet you have it on a loan. I do. That wasn't possible before. But now in the 1920s, it's possible. And it starts with automobiles, because an automobile is a big freaking purchase. Okay? It's the most expensive thing that we buy besides a college education and a home. I mean, think about that. And think about how necessary it is to have a car, especially in a city like El Paso. Just, you know, don't buy a Mustang or you end up on FitFam because your car's on fire or flipped over. Because that's what always happens to Mustangs, right? They take the Mustang L, as they say. Sorry. In any case, so now people can buy a lot of stuff that they couldn't buy before. And we see the advent of all kinds of new consumer spending. So things like department stores start to become a thing. You know, before, you would go and buy your clothing, maybe even one piece of clothing at one shop, and you'd buy some of your housewares, like your pots and pans and curtains, whatever. Maybe that's at another store. But now we start to see the rise of, number one, huge department stores, especially in New York. Okay, we're not quite to the point of Macy's just yet. I mean, they're around, but they're not the big one. It's Marshall and Field Company, that's the big one. They're not, I don't think that they're around anymore. I can't remember. Most department stores are failing now. I mean, we've seen a lot of them go out. In El Paso, we've like Sunland Park Mall has really gotten hit hard with the department store / retail apocalypse. But anyway, here we have them in the 1920s. And not only do we have big department stores, we have mail order catalogs like Sears and Roebuck. And all of a sudden, all of these goods are available to people who couldn't get them before because it was hard to get because of transportation, or they couldn't afford them, or anything like that. This is a huge deal. And as the 1920s go forward, more and more people want to buy more and more stuff, and they keep buying it on credit. And that's gonna be a problem. Spoiler alert. But it creates an inflated economy. Like, it makes us look great on paper because, like, think about it. We have American manufacturers who are making goods in America, and Americans are buying them crazy pants style. Like, that's how you get a good, robust economy. Consumer spending. Like, that helps an immense amount. So we have that going on. And this makes the pro-business candidates for president look really great. So after Harding dies of a heart attack in 1923, Calvin Coolidge, who he steps in to be president. He's elected in 1924. And Calvin Coolidge has his one full term as president. He decides not to run again, and Herbert Hoover runs in 1928. They're all pro-business. They're all kind of this free market capitalist kind of politician. No, like, they want to keep the government out of business, let business do what business is going to do. They also pursue kind of an isolationist viewpoint in terms of trade, in terms of foreign politics, etc. And that really sets the tone for politics in the 1920s. That's going to change because this little thing called the Great Depression happens. Little thing. Yeah. Little. And we'll talk about it more next week when we talk about the Great Depression. But the Great Depression is a global catastrophe. It's not just an American event. It is an absolute global meltdown. And then World War II happens. It's not wonderful, to say the least. The 30s and 40s are some rough years. We'll talk about it. So, but for now, in the 1920s, things are great. At least in terms of business. Now, we could talk about the individual politics of Harding and Coolidge and Hoover, but nobody wants that. Let's just kind of all lump them together. They're not the anti-progressive presidents, but we could call them kind of like the pro-business Republicans of the 1920s, which doesn't make a good acronym. Shouldn't go on a poster. It's not very catchy. Let's say that. So we have some consequences we got to talk about. Number one, we've made all manufacturing internal to ourselves, and we need to produce a whole lot of goods to meet demand, to keep prices low so people keep buying them. But we don't really focus on foreign markets too much because we're trying to pursue isolationist policies. We're getting ourselves into a bit of trouble. It's not great. Beyond that, let's talk about this word modernity, what it is to be modern. And I said in the introduction, this is something that's complex and it's constantly a moving target. The way I would describe trying to define what modern is like nailing Jell-O to a wall. Let me just picture that for a second. You take a big floppy piece of green Jell-O and you're try to put it in the wall. What's going to happen? That Jell-O is going to like all the way down the wall and it's going to make a mess on your floor. It's not good. What I mean by that is that it's one of those things you just can't nail down a single definition. And part of the reason why is that everyone in their own present thinks of themselves as modern. And what the particular traits that make them modern are depends entirely on the person who is defining what modern is. So modern to us, when we say we are modern human beings, we have things like the internet, an iPhone, we have kind of fuel efficient cars, we are able to conduct live streams like this, again, because of the internet. We have jet planes, all this kinds of stuff. That's what modern is to us. But rewind to the 1920s, and they are saying we are the most modern, and they're right because it's the 1920s. And what their definition of modern is gasoline, electricity, department stores, all that sort of stuff. That's not modern to us. That's kind of old to us. That's 100 years ago to us, literally. But to them, in the 1920s, they're modern. And they can confidently say that they're modern. So kind of, hopefully you can see how modernity is this kind of sticky sort of thing. Or it depends on who's claiming to be modern. Anyway, sorry, Mom. Smoke a lot of weed and go to a philosophy class if you really want to explore that issue. Or take a theory class. That's fun. Yeah. In any case, modernity, new things like electricity, gas, all that, cause a lot of anxiety because they mean things about the way in which you experience the world that deviates from your normal experience. So imagine, for example, you are, some of you are 90s kids. Imagine your life before the internet and after the internet. And, it's not so bad, but you Generation Zers, imagine your life without the internet. That would be scary. On the other side, think about the technologies that are coming out. So one of the things that I noticed on Twitter this weekend is people are taking historical portraits, sending them into this website, and they're animating them. So I saw ones of historical figures like Frederick Douglass and John C. Calhoun, and they kind of turn their head and they blink a couple times. It's so uncanny valley creepy. But that's terrifying in some ways because that means people are going to start sending in photos of their relatives, their deceased relatives, right? Because this can kind of bring them back to life in that virtual way. But what kinds of data is that company collecting on people? And how is that going to be used in a way that may not be advantageous to you? Same thing with DNA analysis tests at home, right? Where is that information being stored? Where's it going? Full disclosure, I did a 23andMe. I wasn't too afraid about it. But these are questions that we have to wrestle with as citizens of this new modern experience that we're in. Same thing in the 1920s. So as we get cars, as we get electricity everywhere, as we get a free range of goods, that's going to mean some really big changes. And those changes are going to provoke a considerable amount of anxiety. So this is embarrassing because my mom's here, but sorry, Mom, you got to listen to this. Let's talk about sex for a minute. And everyone's like, oh, God damn it. Why do we have to talk about this? Let's talk about cars and sex. And not those weird dudes who look at a sports car and be like, oh yeah, man, I love the rear end on that thing. Oh my God. No. Let's talk about dating. And before the advent of the car, how would a date go? You'd go, let's say you're the dude, knock on the door, hello, sir, I'm here to spend time with your daughter. And he says, okay, well, I don't know what she sees in you, but come in anyway. And you would have a date where you were supervised. All aspects of the date would be supervised. You would be chaperoned, especially in more conservative households, right? Like, mom and dad are watching you interact, and it's to kind of prevent that funny business from happening, right? Now, imagine you're a dude with a car. Hello. I just made my dogs bark. That's hilarious. I'm here to take your daughter out, sir. Oh, I don't know what she sees in you, but now here she comes. You kids have fun. Now you're in a car. Now you can go out and you can go to a jazz club. Maybe you go to a speakeasy. Maybe you go watch one of these new movies. These talking pictures, as they called them back then. And then afterwards, you got a car that you can go park somewhere. And what do hormonal spiked teenagers and young adults do in cars with no supervision? Well, they don't play cards, ladies and gentlemen. They definitely don't do that. So now we have more opportunities for sexual gratification, which always scares Americans. Let's be really clear about that. We're very, very prudish compared to other countries when it comes to our sex lives. Now there's that opportunity. Oh, by the way, what happens when you have unprotected sex? A lot of the times, because the pull-out method don't work, folks, pregnancy happens. Well, guess what we start to see a lot of in the 1920s? New forms of birth control, except it's illegal. In fact, the Postal Service, I'm not kidding you, the Postal Service gets involved in policing the sale of contraceptives, things like condoms. A guy named Anthony Comstock. The Comstock Act is all about making sure that things like condoms aren't being sold through the mail. Seriously, I'm not joking. And like even the old school ads from the 20s and 30s, like they're ads for condoms because people want condoms. But they're kind of, it's like, when you go to a smoke shop and you go and you want to buy a bong, maybe none of you have this experience, but when you go to a smoke shop, you go to a head shop, if you call it a bong, they kick you out. You have to call it a water pipe. Because if you call it a water pipe, then it could be used for tobacco. But a bong, well, that's for that other stuff that you smoke. So likewise with condoms, you can call it a condom. You had to call it another word for it, like prophylactic, those sorts of things. And you should Google around, man. Like they're hilarious. And it's really interesting how this comes about. But do you see how these dominoes are starting to fall? Okay, well, we have pro-business, market expansion, cars as a result of this pro-business market expansion. Now that we have cars and people are buying cars on credit, they're more widely available, plus these other entertainment technologies, this is leading to a different kind of dating life, which means more opportunities for sex, which means more chances for birth control. Like, it's all kind of fallen in place. This is why I find history so interesting. So, obviously, that is going to cause some anxiety. And there was anxiety, plenty of it. And it wasn't just about sex, it was about all sorts of other things. And we see the progression of these groups that want to try to fix parts of American society, like the progressives did, and some of these people are still progressives. They have other problems that they want to solve, like alcohol, for example. Alcohol was a problem. And alcohol had been a problem. No worries, Zane, you're fine. Don't worry about it. Remember, I record this and you'll be able to watch the whole thing, so don't worry about it. With alcohol, you have to go back to the 1830s to really look at the beginnings of this kind of anti-alcohol crusade. But let me tell you this, prior to the 1830s, Americans were drinking a ton of booze. Before the 1830s, every person, this is an average, on average, not adults, on average, every American over the age of 15 was drinking 7.1 gallons of hard liquor every year. Imagine 7.1 gallons, 7 milk cartons full of vodka in your refrigerator. And you, an individual, are going to drink that every single year. At least. It's a lot of booze. It's a lot of booze. So in the 1830s, we see a temperance movement. And by the time we get to the 1920s, that has had 90 years to mature. Plus, we have more urbanization, more big cities, more immigrants, all this other stuff. All these things that people were associating with America's alcohol problem are growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And finally, in the 1920s, Americans say, enough, we're done. And there's enough push that a constitutional amendment gets inserted into the Constitution, sorry for the repetitious phrase, that bans the sale of alcohol. That's what the 18th Amendment was all about. No boobs. Sucks, man. But that's what it was. Don't worry, it got repealed. Obviously, booze is legal. But it comes out of this anxiety that we're talking about. And it had been a long-term problem. And this, you can apply this, we're starting to run out of time. You can apply this to all kinds of other things as well. There is an anxiety about this new sex that people are having. Okay, like because of cars and, you know, women have different attitudes towards it. There's anxiety about all the consumer culture. There is anxiety about developments in science and in academia. This is where the Scopes monkey trial or the evolution trial comes from, in part. There's anxiety about the African Americans who moved to the North in the Great Migration. There's anxiety about all kinds of stuff. And so one way to try to harness, to try to overcome that anxiety, is get rid of the problem, which is what some of the reformers are doing. Another way to escape some of this anxiety is to literally escape it. And this is why the 1920s are referred to in some ways as, in some places, as the decade of escape or the culture of escape. And think about the things that were kind of coming along, like movies, etc. This is why people really get invested in sports heroes. And man, let me tell you, there was no shortage of sports heroes in the 1920s. This is Jack Dempsey. This is Babe Ruth. I mean, I'm a Red Sox fan, guys, but let's be honest. The 1927 Yankees might be the best baseball team of all time. It's hard to argue. Okay? Ruth, Gehrig, Mantle, DiMaggio. My God, man. Like, serious slayers, to say the least. But this offered people an escape from this reality that was confusing, that was causing them anxiety, etc. So there's that. Another way you deal with this anxiety is you commit acts of violence. That's where the Klan comes in. And we're starting to run out of time, but let me say this. There is, in the 1920s, a resurgence of the Klan. And we tend to think of the Klan as specifically anti-black because we have this image of the Klan as being particularly Southern, as we tend to look at the Klan as these kind of relics from the Reconstruction era, the first era of the Klan. The second era of the Klan takes that and expands it. So one of the things that the second Klan, this Klan resurgence of the Klan in 1915 and through the 1920s, it's not just anti-blackness. It's anti-blackness. It's anti-immigration. It's anti-Catholic. It's anti-Semitic. Okay, they hate Jews too. And so what the Klan becomes is this ultranationalist white Protestant organization that exists to do whatever it takes to protect white Protestant safety, quote unquote. That means preserving the white race, because they're very much like that. They don't want any racial mixing whatsoever, and it's still not quite legal to have interracial marriages at this point. Oh, by the way, black men can't vote, at least in the South. Black women can't vote, at least in the South. Or, like they can on paper, according to the 15th Amendment and the 19th Amendment, but reality is different. The Klan gets invested in a lot of these conservative projects to stop what they see as a rising tide of globalism and Jewish takeover and Catholic takeover. One of the things the textbook talks about is when I forget if it was Hoover or if it was Coolidge, but Al Smith was the opponent, and Alfred Smith was a Catholic, and people didn't want to vote for him because they thought he would be too subservient to the Pope and not actually take care of American interests. And believe it or not, we didn't have a Catholic president until 1960, John F. Kennedy, and they said the same things about him. Joe Biden, our current president, is only the second Catholic in American history to be president. And some people were still whispering, oh, maybe he's too loyal to the Pope. Bizarre, right? Well, America has a lot of anti-Catholicism left in it. It's an old phenomenon. In any case, so it seems to me that there's this kind of, let's just call it what it is, an unholy alliance between the Klan and this anxiety, okay, a way to alleviate this anxiety that's going on in the 1920s. If you're curious about some of these connections, let me recommend this book called The Gospel According to the Klan. It's by a scholar named Kelly Baker, and she writes about how the Klan really kind of comes back and rides this new form of Protestant Christianity, which we really didn't have time to talk about. I thought we would have time. Turns out we didn't have time. But you should read about the fundamentalist turn in the Yop for sure. It's really important. It helps explain the presence of certain forms of evangelical Christianity in the United States today. It's important that you understand that. Yes, I'm a scholar of religion and particularly of Christianity, but I'm telling you, as somebody who watches politics, you have to understand Christianity in order to understand the United States. You have to. You just have to. Baker's book is a really good kind of look at this era and see how that fundamentalist Christianity that has that very kind of anti-Catholic, anti-Jewish positioning matches up with the Klan pretty well. And even members of the Klan today would claim that they are protecting a white Protestant version of Christianity, and so on and so forth. So we've reached that magical time. It's 11:55. I've been talking this whole time about this, that, and the third thing. So I haven't seen any questions yet, but I'm going to pause. And if you've got a question for me, throw it in the chat, and we'll use these last couple minutes to see if I can't come up with a good answer for you, if you've got any questions. So throw them in the chat. I'm going to be quiet starting now. All right. Well, it looks like we don't have any questions, or you're just slow typers, maybe. I don't know. That's okay. If you have any questions that come up about the 1920s or any of the things that we talked about, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Let's schedule a Teams meeting, or we can have an email exchange, whatever it is. If you've got questions, I want to help you find answers. That's what I'm here to do. So do that. I haven't made your introductory video for this week because it's a really week. It's busy. I'm gonna try to do that this afternoon between a couple of meetings. But remember, you've only got a few things to do this week. It's just the quiz, the primary source guide, and your discussion post. With your discussion posts, make sure you're referring to the primary sources. I want to see more of that. And that's what's really holding a couple people back in terms of their grades. So the more connections you can make to the primary sources you're reading, the better. And I'll say that again in the intro video. And I'm going to hit that over your head until I'm blue in the face. So keep that in mind. Other than that, guys, I got nothing if you got nothing. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off and get myself a little lunch and then get back to work. But again, if you have any questions, if I can do anything for you, you just let me know. And I will see you guys for a couple of videos a little bit later on. So have a good rest of your week. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Keep reading. It's good for your health. I promise. It's good for the soul. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care of yourselves. Be good.